The horse came in bleeding. That was the first thing Cole Reardon noticed, before he saw the woman, before he saw the children huddled in the wagon bed like field mice caught in the open. He saw the mare's left flank, dark and wet where something had grazed her, and his hand moved to the rifle on the porch post before his eyes had even finished taking in the full picture. The afternoon sun sat low and punishing over the Cimarron Flats, the kind of light that turned everything the color of hammered brass and made shadows look like they were trying to bury themselves. It was the kind of heat that made a man question what he'd done wrong in a previous life. The woman pulled the reins hard and the wagon shuddered to a stop in his yard, raising a red curtain of Oklahoma dust. She was maybe 28, maybe younger. It was hard to tell with road-worn women. The sun had a way of stealing years from their faces and depositing them somewhere no one could return. Her hair was the color of creek mud, pinned loose, and her jaw was set like quarried stone. "Mister," she said, not asking for anything, just stating the opening of something, "You're well still running." Cole looked at the mare. Looked at the woman. Looked at the two children, a boy of perhaps 7 and a girl younger than that, her eyes enormous and glassy beneath a bonnet that had once been yellow. "It is," he said. She nodded once, like that settled a question she'd been carrying a long way. He never told her to get down. She never asked permission. She simply climbed from the wagon with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been doing everything herself for a long time, and she began working the pump. Cole Reardon stood on his porch and did not move for a long moment. Then he went inside and put on a second pot of coffee. If this story already has you feeling something, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. Her name was Nora Vass, and she did not offer that information freely. Cole learned it the way he learned most things in that country, by waiting. She watered the horse, inspected the wound herself, and made a sound that was neither relief nor alarm. The boy climbed down without being asked and led the mare toward the shade of the elm at the fence line. The girl stayed in the wagon, watching Cole with that particular stillness children develop when they have seen too much move too fast. "She catch a bullet?" Cole asked from a distance. He'd learned early that women who arrived the way this one had did not appreciate men walking up close without invitation. "Barbed wire," Nora said. "We came through the tanner drawer at night. Didn't see it until she screamed. That drawer floods come spring. Somebody strung wire across to keep cattle from drifting. Somebody's wire nearly cost me everything," she said, and that was the whole of that conversation. Cole's house was what the territory would have generously called a working ranch and what honest men would have called barely maintained. There were 3 rooms, a main room that served as kitchen, sitting area, and dining all at once, a bedroom that had belonged to his mother before she passed, and a sleeping porch tacked on the back where Cole himself bunked. The floor needed sweeping badly. There were dishes in the basin that had been there since Tuesday. The window above the stove had a cracked pane he'd been meaning to replace since April, and it was now deep into August. He did not apologize for any of it. Nora Vass walked in, set down a canvas sack on the table without asking, and looked at the room the way a general looks at damaged terrain, assessing, planning. Already moving in her mind before her body caught up. "I'll cook," she said. "If you've got anything worth cooking." Pantry's beside the door. "Not much, but there's salt pork and dried beans. Flour. I keep onions in the cellar." She sent the boy, his name was Thomas, Cole would learn, down for the onions, and within 10 minutes she had already cleared the table, stacked the dishes in the basin with a firm precision, and was moving through his kitchen like she had always known where everything was kept. Which was unsettling in a way Cole could not immediately name. He sat in the chair by the window and watched her work without offering to help, because he sensed that helping would have been an insult. The girl came inside eventually, drawn by the smell of the onions hitting the iron skillet. She stood near the door with her arms at her sides and her eyes tracking her mother with the intensity of a small animal that has learned to read weather from the behavior of the herd. "Sit down, Clara," Nora said without turning around. "Clara Saturday." Cole noticed the girl picked the chair closest to the door. He noticed Thomas, returning with a clutch of yellowed onions, also did not sit with his back fully to the room. He noticed these things and he filed them away quietly, the way a man does when he has lived alone long enough that reading people has become the only conversation he regularly has. The beans were dried and needed time, so Nora made do with the salt pork, the onions, a tin of tomatoes from the pantry shelf, and the heels of bread from a loaf she produced from her own canvas sack. She made it into a kind of stew, thin but honest, and she did it without measurements or hesitation. Her hands moving with the muscle memory of 10,000 previous meals prepared in difficult circumstances. When the food was done, she set 4 bowls on the table. Cole looked at his bowl and then at her. "You don't need to," he started. "You're feeding 3 people who arrived unannounced," she said flatly. "The least one of them can do is cook the meal." He ate. It was the best thing he'd had in weeks, which was less a commentary on her skill, though she was skilled, and more a commentary on how long a man could survive on his own indifference. Thomas ate with his head down, focused and efficient. Clara stirred her bowl for a long time before eating, watching Cole from beneath her bonnet brim with those oversized eyes. At one point she looked at her mother and Nora gave her the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, and Clara began to eat. They did not talk much during the meal. The wind came up outside and pushed dust against the cracked window pane and Cole watched the flame in the lamp shiver. He tried to remember the last time there had been more than 1 bowl on that table and came up empty. When supper was done, he cleared the dishes himself, carried them to the basin, and began to wash them without being asked. He heard Nora pause behind him, and he did not turn around, but he felt the small shift in the room, something loosening by the smallest degree. Some part of the wall she carried going down by 1 stone. She settled the children on a bedroll near the stove. He brought an extra blanket from the cedar chest without comment, set it on the chair beside them, and went out to the sleeping porch. He lay on his bunk and listened to the flatlands exhale in the dark. In the morning, he would fix that window. He was at the window before first light, his tools on the sill and a new pane of glass he'd had stored in the barn since April wrapped in burlap. He had not needed a reason to install it before. Now, without quite examining why, it felt urgent. Nora appeared in the doorway of the kitchen with sleep still around her eyes and a shawl pulled close, and she watched him work for a moment without speaking. "Thomas knows carpentry," she said at last. "If you have something for his hands today, it'll keep him from trouble. I've got fence line that needs mending at the south pasture. Post drivers in the barn. He's 7. I'll go with him." Another small stone came down from the wall. She moved past him to start the fire in the stove. And they worked in that same proximity without colliding, the kitchen living space rearranged by 2 people who were slowly learning the geometry of sharing it. Thomas was a good worker, which was to say he was quiet and he paid attention and he did not complain about the heat. Cole showed him how to read a leaning post, how to dig the new hole at the right angle, how to pack the earth back in layers so it held. The boy absorbed instruction the way dry ground absorbed rain, immediately, completely, leaving no trace of the surface puddle after. Between posts, Thomas said, "Mama cried last night." Cole drove the bar down into the earth and said nothing. "She thinks I didn't hear," the boy said. "I always hear." "That's a hard thing," Cole said. "She didn't cry when Papa was sick. She didn't cry at the burial. She cried last night after she thought we were both asleep." Thomas stopped and looked out at the flat horizon with those eyes that were too old for his face. "I think it was because she wasn't scared for the first time in a long while." Cole looked at the fence post and thought about that. "You don't say much," Thomas observed. "No. Mama says quiet men are either simple or deep. What do you think?" Cole asked. Thomas regarded him for a long, solemn moment. "I think you're the second kind," he said, and went back to packing earth around the post. Clara warmed more slowly than her brother, the way a hearthstone takes longer to hold heat than the air around it. She did not speak to Cole directly for the first 3 days, but on the 4th morning he found her standing in the barn looking at his old roan horse, Pepper. with that enormous solemn regard of hers. He went to the tack room and came back with a small handful of dried apple he kept for that purpose. And he set it on the fence rail near her without a word and walked away to check the feed situation. When he came back, the apple was gone and Clara was letting Pepper lip at her palm. She still did not speak to him. But that evening at supper she passed him the bread without waiting to be asked, which was, in the language of frightened children, practically a speech. 40 miles east, in the low-water creek town of Bardo Crossing, a man named Devin Spall was asking questions. He was not a large man, which was perhaps the most deceptive thing about him. He was lean and well-dressed in the way that men who want to be mistaken for something respectable sometimes dress themselves: tan vest, clean hat, boots that had been resoled twice. He had a way of smiling that never involved his eyes, and those eyes were the color of shallow water over pale stone, light, almost colorless, missing something that eyes were supposed to have. He sat at the counter of Bardo's one general store and asked his questions in the same pleasant, incidental tone a man uses when he's discussing weather or crop prices. Woman traveling with 2 small ones. Came through here maybe 4-5 days back. Pretty enough, road-worn. Dark hair. The store owner, a thick-necked man named Gould, said he got a lot of travelers through. This one would have been memorable, Spall said, with the confidence of a man who believed he was the center of everyone's story. She'd have been moving fast. Possibly scared, though she'd hide it well. Gould polished a can and set it on the shelf and said he didn't take notice of folks' business. Spall laid a coin on the counter, not a small one, and left it there without looking at it, the way a man leaves bait. Gould let the coin sit. Spall smiled with his mouth only and stood. "She's my wife," he said pleasantly. "Lost her in all the confusion after we had a dispute. Family business. You understand." He bought a tin of tobacco and left. Gould watched him go, and then looked at the coin on the counter, and then looked at the road through the dusty window for a long time after the man was gone. It was the boy from the feed store, Elmer Peck's youngest, who mentioned 3 days later to his father that some fancy-dressed fellow had been asking around about a woman with dark hair and 2 children. Elmer Peck mentioned it at his wife's church circle. By the following Friday, it had traveled the way news travels in flat country, invisibly, everywhere, on the same wind that carries seeds and fire. 40 miles west, Cole Reardon was replacing shingles on his barn roof and did not know any of this yet. The Saturday run to Harlow's Creek was unavoidable. Cole needed grain and lamp oil and a new axle pin for the wagon, and Nora needed thread, salt, and, though she did not say so directly, a sense of what the land around her looked like in daylight without the threat of darkness pressing at her back. They went together out of practicality and nothing else. That was what Cole told himself. Nora dressed plainly and wore her hair pinned back severely, the way women dress when they want to be invisible. Clara rode between them on the wagon bench, Thomas in the bed. The morning air was still cool enough to be pleasant, which in that country meant it was early, and the light was low and golden over the grassland and made everything look kinder than it was. Harlow's Creek was a town that had been almost big once and hadn't given up the pretense. It had a main street of perhaps 12 businesses, general store, livery, barber, 2 saloons, a church that doubled as a meeting hall, and a bank that served more as a ledger keeper for debt than any repository of prosperity. The people who ran these establishments knew each other's histories with the intimacy of people who have nothing else to occupy them. And newcomers were examined with the particular attention of those who have assigned themselves the work of defining what belongs and what does not. Cole was known in Harlow's Creek. He paid his debts, minded his business, and showed up for the things, the occasional barn raising, the annual stock auction, that marked a man as a member of the community rather than a hermit who simply shared its geography. He was respected in the way quiet, capable men are respected, without warmth, but without suspicion. That changed at the general store. Lena Marsh stood behind the fabric counter with the permanent expression of a woman who has appointed herself custodian of other people's choices. She was somewhere past 60, sharp-featured, with small eyes that missed nothing and a tongue that was never idle long enough to let what it observed remain private. She saw Nora before she saw Cole, and something moved across her face that was not quite accusation and not quite welcome. "Cole Reardon," she said, setting her hands flat on the counter. "I didn't know you had family coming to visit." "They're staying at the ranch," Cole said, setting his list on the counter. The silence that followed was the kind that towns build fences with. "Staying," Lena repeated. Nora was at the thread display with Clara, not looking at Lena Marsh, but Cole could see from the set of her shoulders that she heard every word. "Staying," he said again, without embellishment. "And you're, well." Lena straightened herself to her full height, which was considerable. Her name is Nora Vass," Cole said. "Her children are Thomas and Clara. They're good people who needed a place and I had one. Cole, I mean no offense, but you do understand how this looks. A single man taking in a strange woman and how it looks," Cole said quietly, "is somebody's business, and it isn't yours." Lena Marsh's face went through several phases. She settled on something between wounded dignity and cold civility. "I only say what others are too polite to, then be polite," Cole said, and looked back at his list. The moment hung there in the store like smoke, and Galen Pruitt, who ran the store and who had been carefully rearranging tins for the entirety of this exchange, set Cole's grain order on the counter and began tallying quietly. But the encounter had its effects. Cole felt the town watching as they moved from store to livery to hardware. Nods that were normally given freely were now slightly delayed, slightly angled away. A group of women near the church steps lowered their voices in a way designed to be noticed. It was Thomas who caught the worst of it, a cluster of boys near the water trough who said something Cole didn't hear but whose intention landed clearly in the way Thomas's jaw tightened and his hands went still at his sides. Cole walked to the water trough, unhurried, and the boys found other places to be without any word being spoken. Thomas looked up at him. "Pay it no mind," Cole said. "You don't have to protect me," the boy said, with a dignity that was almost painful in one so young. "I know it," Cole said. "I did it anyway." That afternoon, as they loaded the wagon and prepared to leave, Reverend Hoyt Callow materialized at Cole's elbow with the supernatural timing of clergymen everywhere. He was a small, gentle man who genuinely meant well, which sometimes made him more dangerous than Lena Marsh. Because his observations arrived wrapped in genuine concern rather than the transparent packaging of judgment. "Cole," he said quietly, "there is talk. I won't pretend there isn't. There's always talk. This is particular talk. A man came through Bardo Crossing, I'm told, asking after a woman fitting Mrs. Vass's description." The Reverend looked at his hands. "I don't know the particulars, but I think you should." Cole was quiet for a long beat. Across the street, Nora was lifting Clara into the wagon bed, and the afternoon sun found the side of her face and she looked, in that one unguarded moment, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the road. "Thank you, Hoyt," Cole said. He drove home saying nothing about what the Reverend had told him. But his eyes moved differently on the return trip, cataloguing the roads, the draws, the distances between things. Planning the way men plan when they have decided that whatever comes, it will not find them unprepared. The sound that woke him was small. Cole had always been a light sleeper. It was not a skill he'd cultivated so much as a condition the territory had pressed into him over years. The sleeping porch was open to the south, and every sound the flatland made at night came to him as clearly as conversation. He knew the coyotes and the grass and the way the cottonwood by the creek spoke in the wind. He knew the sound of Pepper moving in the barn, and the particular sound of the windmill when the breeze dropped to nothing and it turned reluctant and slow. What he heard at 2 in the morning was not any of those things. It was a footstep, one footstep, placed carefully, on the ground near the corner of the barn. Then silence. Then nothing for a long time. Cole was already sitting upright. He had the rifle from its hook before he was fully awake, which was the kind of reflex that cannot be learned, only worn into a man. He moved to the porch edge and went still, listening with his whole body the way animals listen, pulling information from the texture of the dark. The moon was a thin crescent and barely useful. The yard was all shapes and shadows. There, near the barn's east corner, a figure, still watching the house. Cole stepped off the porch and moved wide around the garden bed, staying in the shadow of the house wall, placing his feet in the soft dirt where they would make no sound. It took him 3 full minutes to work his way around to the east corner of the barn, and in those 3 minutes his heart was deliberate and slow because he had made it so. Because there was no use in the other kind. The figure was a man, medium height, a hat pulled down, a rifle held at the carry. He was watching the house with his whole attention, which meant his attention was not on the barn wall 6 feet behind him. Cole came around the corner and pressed the barrel of his rifle against the base of the man's skull. "Set it down," Cole said. His voice was so quiet it was almost gentle. The man set the rifle down. "Your hands on the wall. Lean." The man complied. He was younger than Cole had expected, maybe 25, with a thin mustache and the look of someone hired to be somewhere rather than someone who had come of his own conviction. "Who sent you?" Cole said. Silence. "I'm going to ask that once more," Cole said, "and then we're going to move to a different conversation." "Man named Spall," the young man said. His voice had gone thin and tight. He just wanted to know if she was here. "That's all. I wasn't going to do nothing. You came to my property in the dark with a rifle to ask a question." The young man didn't answer. Cole stepped back and picked up the man's rifle. He ejected the rounds into the dirt one at a time, then set the empty rifle against the barn wall. "Here is what is going to happen," Cole said, very quietly, in the voice he used when he meant every syllable. "You're going to get on your horse and ride east. You're going to tell the man who sent you that Nora Vass is not here. You didn't see her. You don't know where she went. You'll tell him you checked thoroughly and came up empty. He'll know what you tell him. You have that choice and not many others tonight." Cole paused. "If I find out you told him anything different, I'll come to Bardo Crossing myself. And I won't come quietly." The man left. Cole watched him until the sound of hooves faded entirely into the dark, then stood in the yard a long time with the rifle at his side, letting the night settle back around him. He went inside and moved quietly through the main room. The children were asleep on their bedroll, Thomas with one arm thrown over Clara in a gesture that was so instinctively protective it made something clench in Cole's chest. Nora was awake. She was sitting at the table with her hands folded in front of her, and she had clearly been awake for some time. The lamp was turned low and she was a shape in the amber half-dark, watching the door. "Someone from Spall," Cole said. "I know." Her voice was completely level. "I heard you go out. He's gone." She looked at her hands. The lamp flame wavered in some imperceptible draft and her shadow shifted against the wall. "He won't stop," she said. "He never has." Cole pulled out the other chair and sat across from her. He set the rifle on the table between them, not as a threat, but as a statement, a plain declaration of where he stood. "Tell me the whole of it," he said. And she did. It took an hour. Spall was not her husband, that was the first thing she corrected. He had been her husband's employer, and when her husband died owing Spall a debt that Spall had manufactured for exactly this purpose. Spall had come to collect in the way that men like him collect, by claiming ownership over everything the dead man left, including the living. She had run when he sent men to fetch her, taking her children in the night with what she could carry. "He has a paper," she said. "A deed. He says the land transferred to him at my husband's death and that I owe him labor and residence. The paper is real enough to fool a judge in the counties where he has influence." "How far does his influence reach?" "I don't know. I've been trying to outrun the answer to that." Cole was quiet for a long time. The night pressed against the windows. Somewhere out on the flatlands a coyote spoke once and went silent. "I won't let him take you," Cole said. It was such a simple statement, delivered with so little drama, that it landed harder than a proclamation would have. Nora looked at him across the table. Her eyes in the low light were dark and direct and old with the knowledge of how many times a promise had been made to her and dissolved. "You don't know what you're saying," she said. "I know exactly what I'm saying," he answered. And she looked at him for a long time, measuring something, and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Cole rode into Harlow's Creek the next morning before the town had fully woken. He went to the office of William Creed, who was the nearest thing the territory had to a legitimate attorney, and who operated out of a room above the barber shop that smelled of pomade and old paper. Creed was a thin, careful man who had studied law in Ohio and arrived in the territory under circumstances he never discussed but which had left him with the permanent look of a man who expected to be caught at something. He was, despite this, honest, or at least as honest as the law allowed for. Cole laid out the situation without embellishment. Creed listened with his fingertips pressed together and his eyes on the ceiling. The deed Spall holds, Creed said, would have to be filed and registered in the county of origin to carry legal standing here. If she's crossed county lines, which she has, considerably, he would need to petition the territorial court for an enforcement order. That takes time and requires him to appear in person. He cannot simply arrive and remove a person from a property he doesn't own. "He doesn't own mine," Cole said. "No. He has no standing whatsoever on your land." Creed paused. "That said, if she is unattached and he presents himself as having a legal claim over her assets, which he apparently argues include her person and her children's guardianship, a sympathetic circuit judge could grant him temporary standing to compel her to appear before the court." He paused again. "Certain things would complicate that petition considerably." Cole looked at him steadily. "If she were, for instance, legally bound to a property holder in this county," Creed said carefully, "a spouse, the claim would then be against a married woman living with her lawful husband on legally registered property, which is a substantially different and considerably less actionable position." Cole sat with that for a moment. "How long would it take to register a marriage?" he asked. Creed looked at him with the expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by what the territory required of people. "Reverend Callow can perform the ceremony. I can file the registration with the county clerk by end of day. It would be recorded and legal by week's end." Cole stood up, set his hat back on his head, and laid payment for the consultation on the desk. "I'll need you at the church at 4 o'clock, he said. He rode back to the ranch. Nora was at the clothesline, hanging shirts in the warm morning wind, and she turned when she heard him coming up the road. She did not come toward him. She waited, in the way she did everything, with a stillness that contained rather than expressed. He got down from the horse. He stood a distance from her, holding his hat. "There's a man named Creed in town," he said. "He's a lawyer. He told me that Spall's claim on you is manageable so long as you remain unattached and without clear legal standing in a property. The moment you have those things," he stopped, looked out at the flat horizon, then back at her. "I know what I'm about to say sounds like something other than what it is. I need you to hear what it actually is." Nora's hands had gone still on the clothesline. "I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean," Cole continued. "I'm also not a man who, this is not a transaction. What I'm telling you is that I would like, if you're willing, to offer you something that protects you from Spall in the most permanent legal way available. And I would like that something to be real, not only useful." He looked down at the hat in his hands. "I am not asking out of charity. I'm asking because the last 11 days have been the first time in longer than I can name that this house felt like something other than a place I happened to sleep." Nora looked at him for so long, without speaking, that the wind came up and took a lock of her hair across her face and she didn't move to fix it. "I'm only marrying you to save your life," she said. "Do you understand that?" Something moved across Cole Reardon's face, too quick to catalogue, too real to ignore. He smiled. Not a large smile, not a performative one. Just the corners of his mouth, and something quiet in his eyes. He said nothing. And in the saying of nothing, he said everything, because they both understood what the other carried. And they both understood that there were some truths that survived the distance between what we intend and what we feel, and that time was the only honest translator. The ceremony was held at 4 o'clock in Reverend Callow's church, which was also the town's meeting hall, which meant that by 3:30, half of Harlow's Creek had arranged reasons to be in the vicinity. Lena Marsh arrived first, naturally. She sat in the back pew with her hands in her lap and her expression doing the complex work of reconciling her initial judgment with the revised information the afternoon was providing. Thomas stood beside Cole during the brief ceremony, which had not been planned but which Cole had not redirected when the boy took his place there, solemn and straight-backed as a young soldier. Clara sat in the front pew with a section of wildflowers she had picked from Cole's fence line that morning. He did not know when she had gone out to get them, and she held them with a formality that would have made any observer ache. Nora wore the same plain dress, because she had nothing better and she did not pretend otherwise. She stood before Reverend Callow with the same quarried stone jaw she'd had when she pulled the wagon into Cole's yard, except that her eyes, in this moment, held something different, not vulnerability exactly, but an opening. A window newly unlatched. When it was done, Creed filed the registration that afternoon. The document naming Devin Spall's deed as legally inapplicable across county lines, supported by Creed's filing with the territorial court, was dispatched by post 3 days later. Creed was meticulous and he was not above making certain the language of it was as impenetrable and complicated as the law allowed, which was extremely impenetrable and extremely complicated. What reached Bardo Crossing, via various channels, was the simple and somehow satisfying fact that Nora Vass no longer existed, that is, legally, and that in her place stood a woman named Nora Reardon, wife of a registered landholder in a county outside Spall's reach, with 2 children who were now listed in that same county's records under their stepfather's household. The thin-mustached young man, it turned out, had told Spall a version of the truth. He had said he'd searched thoroughly. He had said he'd found nothing. Spall, who was not a stupid man and who understood that his particular leverage depended on the absence of a counterclaim, did some calculation. The calculation, ultimately, did not favor pursuit. He was a man who operated on the advantage of people having no anchor, no legal name in any local record, no one willing to put themselves between him and what he wanted. Remove those conditions and he was simply a man with an expensive piece of paper and a grievance, which in the territory's territorial court was considerably less than nothing. He turned his attention elsewhere. The news of this reached Harlow's Creek the way the other news had, on the wind, invisibly, everywhere. And the town, which had watched Cole Reardon for years with the respectful indifference it afforded capable, solitary men, recalibrated. Lena Marsh, in the fabric section of Galen Pruitt's store, said that she had always thought Cole Reardon was a man of good character, and that it was clear Mrs. Reardon, she used the name deliberately, like placing a stone, was a steady and respectable woman who had simply found herself in difficult circumstances. Whether anyone believed Lena Marsh had always thought this was a question that nobody found useful to raise. Thomas, at school the following Monday, sat at a desk in the one-room schoolhouse in Harlow's Creek, and the boys who had said things at the water trough said nothing. One of them, eventually, asked if Thomas wanted to play at the lunch hour. Thomas considered this for a moment with his old young eyes. "All right," he said. Clara, on the 3rd week, called Cole by his name for the first time. "Not Papa, just Cole," said plainly, directly, as she handed him the bread at supper. He said thank you, and she sat down, and the lamplight held them all in its warm and ordinary circle. There is a kind of repair that does not look like repair. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with the sudden clean sound of new timber or fresh paint. It comes the way grass comes back after fire, slowly, from below, pushing up through the scorched earth in places you had given up on. Green and stubborn and indifferent to the damage that preceded it. Cole Reardon learned, in the months that followed, what it was to be needed, not in the way the territory needed his labor, but in the way that only a home can need a person. Which is to say completely, with no part of you left outside of it. He learned that there was a specific sound a house makes when it is lived in by more than one person, and that this sound was something he had been missing for so long that its return was almost loud. Nora learned, more slowly, what it was to put her weight down somewhere and not feel the ground shift beneath her. She never said so in those words. She showed it the way she showed everything, in the small, steady accumulation of ordinary acts. In the garden she planted along the south wall. In the bread she baked on Fridays that was always slightly more than they needed, because surplus meant safety and safety was still new enough to be tended carefully. The territory does not reward sentiment. It rewards endurance. It rewards the willingness to look at a broken thing and put your hands to it anyway, without certainty of outcome, without guarantee of return. This was a story about two people who had nothing to offer each other except themselves. As it turned out, that was more than enough. If this story moved you, and I believe it did, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a story like this one. Leave a comment telling me the one line from this story that stayed with you. And share this with someone who understands that the strongest thing a person can do is stay.